listener production.
Hi, it's Tara Cassidy with you, and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is in talks to hold a federal royal commission into the deadly Bondi terror attack following weeks of mounting pressure. We'll unpack who should lead it and whether a royal commission would lead to meaningful change. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines. It's Thursday, the 8th of January. A woman has been shot dead by a US Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer during an operation in Minneapolis, sparking protests and political backlash. The woman has been identified as 37-year-old US citizen Renee Nicole Good. Federal officials say the ICE officer acted in self-defence, but Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey says video evidence contradicts that claim.
They are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is There's little I can say, again, that'll make this situation better, but I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis.
The FBI is now investigating. Ms. Good, who was not the target of the operation, leaves behind a 6-year-old son. Her death has intensified criticism of the Trump administration's expanded immigration crackdown in major US cities. Australia is in the grip of its worst heatwave since Black Summer, with catastrophic fire conditions across parts of Victoria, South Australia and New South Wales. The Hume Highway has been closed, regional train services cancelled, with firefighters from multiple states out battling active blazes as temperatures soar. Authorities warn conditions will be unpredictable and uncontrollable, with damaging winds forecast tomorrow. Total fire bans are in place across Victoria, where residents in several areas have been ordered to leave immediately. Emergency services are urging people to stay indoors, stay hydrated and prepare for extreme conditions. And NASA has been forced to postpone its first spacewalk of 2026 due to medical concerns with one of its crew. The walk was scheduled for today, along with a second one next week, so repairs and upgrades can be carried out on the International Space Station. When the expedition does resume, there'll be 7 astronauts on board, with 2 set to exit the station in space to carry out the works. For one of them, Zena Cardman, it will be her very first spacewalk. Now it's time to get into our deep dive into the pressure mounting on Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to hold a federal royal commission examining Australia's deadliest terror attack. 15 people were killed and 40 others injured at a Hanukkah celebration at Bondi Beach on December 14. At the time of recording, the PM is looking set to backflip on his decision and is now in discussions about holding a combined state and federal probe. Here to discuss this topic today is Monash University Public Policy Associate Professor Deirdre O'Neill. Deirdre, thanks very much for joining me on The Briefing today. Can you start by just explaining what the purpose of a royal commission is and what it could achieve that, say, an internal investigation or state probe couldn't?
So a royal commission is a very high-level form of inquiry, possibly the highest level of inquiry that can be commissioned by a government. And it's the federal government and the state governments all have legislation which enables them to appoint royal commissions. What distinguishes royal commissions from, say, other types of inquiries that governments might pursue is that royal commissions have special legal powers, and they have the power to compel evidence and they have the power to compel people to appear before them. So they have quite strong powers that other inquiries would not have. They're sort of semi-judicial type powers that they have in that regard. Having said that, royal commissions don't instruct governments, they advise them. So at the end of the day, a government will set up a royal commission, and there have been royal commissions on many, many different topics, but essentially they're usually set up to find out what happened, why, and perhaps what might be done to ensure that whatever happened doesn't occur again or can be addressed properly. So royal commissions advise governments, they provide reports which contain recommendations, but they do not have the power to instruct governments what to do.
And so is it the only format that can actually compel people? Because I know that has been part of the current conversation relating to the Bondi terror attack Royal Commission. People are calling for one because they want to ensure that authorities that are interstate, intelligence agencies and politicians can be compelled to give evidence.
Yes, essentially that is the case. So they can compel people and they can subpoena people, as it were, and subpoena evidence. And that's not available to other forms of inquiry.
And so with that in mind, do you think that a Royal Commission is the best way forward to examine what did lead to the Bondi terror attack?
Well, I think the Royal Commission is, as I've said, it's the highest level inquiry that can be undertaken. They're often led by people who have, say, retired judges, very senior judicial people with loads of experience and very, very highly regarded people. So they often have as well, and I'm not saying that other forms of inquiry don't have this, but they have often particularly sort of rigorous forms of inquiry. And in the case of this issue, there seems to be a very strong groundswell of support for a Royal Commission to proceed. Now, I understand that one's been appointed in the state of New South Wales, but it's been mentioned that a Royal Commission operating out of New South Wales might encounter some, say, practical or even constitutional issues in terms of interacting, let's say, with federal government agencies or personnel. So the consensus seems to be that if a Royal Commission is going to go ahead, that it needs to be perhaps one that the national government sets up and that, if necessary, other state governments join in with, but that they work in concert, as it were, and that there should be one at a national level. So I think the consensus of opinion is steadily moving towards the setting up of a Royal Commission rather than proceeding with the sort of inquiry that was initially mooted. Although I'm not making any adverse comments about that. The person who was proposed, Dennis Richardson, would be a very capable person to undertake such an inquiry. But a Royal Commission takes things, I think, to another level.
And you've looked into a number of Royal Commissions in the past. In your opinion, what is it that actually makes one successful?
There are Royal Commissions that are successful. This sometimes comes as a surprise to some people who think that they're just activities designed to be, put on the shelf somewhere and gather dust. But really, what goes towards making a successful Royal Commission, I think two key factors. One is the terms of reference that they're given that need to be appropriate to the task to be undertaken. But perhaps even more importantly, the appointment of the Royal Commission or commissioners, because some Royal Commissions have a number of commissioners working for them as opposed to one. There's no recipe or cookie cutter for how a Royal Commission proceeds or how it's constituted. So things like the way a Royal Commission is appointed, the people who are working for it, the way they then proceed, the way they undertake their inquiries is very important, the way they craft their recommendations, for example, to consider recommendations that governments will find implementable. I mean, there's no point sometimes in just going for what are called first best recommendations if politically or in a practical sense they're just not possible. So things like understanding the political context is really important as well, that the Royal Commission is working in, and perhaps being able to develop a coalition of support for any recommendations that may come out of it. And again, as I come back to the recommendations, ensuring that recommendations are sort of practically conceived and oriented, and that they give government a way forward, and that they will make a positive contribution to public policy.
And as you mentioned today, there have been a few names put forward to lead the Royal Commission, including Federal Court Judge Justice Michael Lee, former Chief Justice James Alsop, and former High Court Judge Justice Virginia Bell. But can you tell me why it's commonly judges who are brought in to lead these kinds of inquiries, as opposed to, say, experts in the issue? For example, in this instance, say, a terrorism expert.
Well, that's a really good question. I think judges over the course of their careers manage, as it were, a lot of extremely complex and diverse cases. So judges bring a way of, I think, approaching that sort of legal thinking and rigorous legal thinking to the task at hand. They understand how a Royal Commission is constituted and must proceed, but that doesn't mean that only judges can be Royal Commissioners. But I think really eminent judges and people who have already had a record of undertaking reviews of some sort, and successful ones at that, are those who are, will be well equipped to undertake a review, but that doesn't preclude, as you say, experts. And I'm thinking of, for example, the Royal Commission into institutional responses to, I think, the abuse of children in institutions. That, I think, had about 5 commissioners. The chief commissioner, as it were, was a retired judge, but others were experts from police, from psychiatry, from the family court and elsewhere. So Royal Commissions can bring together people with a range of skills.
And what about for a Royal Commission specifically into the Bondi terror attack? For you, what would be the absolute musts that the government has to do to ensure it's successful?
Well, I come back to the terms of reference. The terms of reference have to be those that will enable a Royal Commission to undertake an effective inquiry into the causes of what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and what can be done to prevent this happening in the past, and to look at any deeper reasons that might be contributing to what happened at Bondi. And the person that's appointed, I think, has to be able to pursue those the terms of reference in a way that will set things out really clearly and will very fairly and impartially review what has happened and proceed. One thing I just might add, Royal Commissions can also provide people with a very important opportunity to be heard. And so there have been Royal Commissions, the one I mentioned, into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. They heard evidence directly from, I think it was over 8,000 survivors of sexual abuse. And that was incredibly important for those people to be heard. One of the inquiries that we looked at in our research was the one into bushfires in Victoria, where a number of communities, of course, had been dreadfully affected by bushfires, and so they were given an opportunity again to be heard and to present their points of view and all the rest of it. And what proceeded was not some sort of witch hunt or finger-pointing exercise in that case. It was always focused on, well, what do we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? So it's very important that a Royal Commission is not just there to say, well, here's the person who was wrong, or here's who was at fault, or whatever it was. But to maybe, if things haven't been done as well as they could be, to explain how and why that happened, but to point to the future and to say, look, this is how we can do better in the future.
Deirdre, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate your insight.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
That was Public Policy Associate Professor Deirdre O'Neill, and that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning with a deep dive on the music trends of 2026. And for more, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Tara Cassidy. Thanks for listening.